Hey guys, it's me, Miss Norris, and today I'd like to share an important read aloud with you of the story A Picture Book of Martin Luther King Jr. The story, A Picture Book of Martin Luther King Jr., was written in 1989 by David A. Adler and illustrated by Robert Casillas, and it tells the important story of Martin Luther King Jr., who goes on to become an important leader in our country. If you're ready to hear the story, I'm ready to share it with you. Here we go. A Picture Book of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's great leaders. He was a powerful speaker, and he spoke out against laws which kept black people out of many schools and jobs. He led protests and marches demanding fair laws for all people. So he didn't want just fairness for himself. He wanted it for every person in our land. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's father was a pastor. His mother had been a teacher. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. So Martin Luther King Jr. was born 95 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia, and he had an older sister and a younger brother. Young Martin liked to play baseball, football, and basketball. He liked to ride his bicycle and to sing. He often sang in his father's church. This is an illustration of Martin Luther King Jr. singing in his father's church choir with his sister Willie Christine and his brother Alfred Daniel. And just so you know for sure that this is a real person. This is a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. when he was just a little boy. Here he was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old, and he was already working on learning on how to be a good person and to be a great leader. Young Martin played in his backyard with his friends. One day he was told that two of his friends would no longer play with him because they were white and he was black. Martin cried. He didn't understand why the color of his skin should matter to anyone. So I know that when I was a kid, I played with all the people who lived in my neighborhood, and that's what Martin did. And then one day, the other boys said that they couldn't play with Martin because they were white and he was black, and he didn't understand that, and it didn't seem very fair at all. It doesn't seem fair to me either. Martin's mother told him that many years ago, black people were brought in chains to America and sold as slaves. She told him that long before Martin was born, the slaves had been set free. However, there were still some people who did not treat black people fairly. And this is definitely a nonfiction story. This is totally true. That even though slaves were freed long before many people were born, people still were angry about it and treated black people unfairly. In Atlanta, where Martin lived, and elsewhere in the United States, there were white only signs. Black people were not allowed in some parks, pools, hotels, restaurants, and even schools. Blacks were kept out of many jobs. So you can see this is a park that says whites only. And you could get in a lot of trouble if you had black skin and you tried to go to these places. A lot of times there would be other parks, but they might not be other parks or restaurants or schools. But they weren't as nice, and that didn't seem fair to a lot of people. Martin learned to read at home before he was old enough to start school. All through his childhood, he read books about black leaders. This is a picture of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and George Washington Carver, some very famous black leaders and scientists and important people to Martin. Martin was a good student. He finished high school. He finished high school 2 years early and was just 15 years old when he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta. Morehouse College in Atlanta. At college, Martin decided to become a minister. After Martin was graduated from Morehouse, he studied for a doctorate at Boston University. While he was there, he met Coretta Scott. She was studying music. They fell in love and got married. So, number one, Martin was very, very smart and was able to finish high school early. He went to a famous college called Morehouse College and became a minister, which is someone who's a leader in church, and then went on to Boston University to get his doctorate, where he met and married Coretta Scott. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. began his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The next year, Rosa Parks, a black woman, was arrested in Montgomery. She had been sitting just behind the whites only section on the bus. When all the seats in that section were taken, the driver told her to get up so a white man could have her seat. Rosa Parks refused. And this is also a true story, and as you can see, that when Rosa Parks refused to move from that bus seat, the police were called and Rosa Parks was arrested for not moving from her seat. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest. Blacks throughout the city refused to ride the buses. Dr. King said, "There comes a time when people get tired of being kicked about." So even though this was a very unfair situation and it made people want to be angry and to fight, Martin Luther King Jr. said, let's not fight, but let's show that we are displeased and we're going to boycott, which means we're going to say we're not going to do this. We're not going to ride your buses until we have equal rights. And that's what these signs say. Boycott public buses, equal rights. If you're not going to let me keep my seat that I paid the same amount of money for, I'm not going to ride your bus and you're going to lose money. One night, while Dr. King was at a meeting, someone threw a bomb into his house. Martin's followers were angry. They wanted to fight. Martin told them to go home peacefully. "We must love our white brothers," he said. "We must meet hate with love." So he said, even if you're so mad and you want to hate and someone is hating you so much, the best thing you can do is just send out love. Send love. Send love. Sometimes being so happy about something and loving someone even when they're angry with you can sometimes make them change their minds, or it can make them angry. The bus protest lasted almost a year. When it ended, there were no more white-only sections on buses. Dr. King decided to move back to Atlanta in 1960. There, he continued to lead peaceful protests against white-only waiting rooms, lunch counters, and restrooms. He led many marches for freedom. So, after protesting for almost a year, after boycotting the buses for almost a year, a whole year, the whites only sections were finally removed from the buses. And at that time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. decided he was going to go back home to Atlanta, where he would continue to have peaceful protests in Atlanta. In 1963, Dr. King led the biggest march of all, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 black and white people followed him. "I have a dream," he said in his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." So he said, I don't want people to see my kids and judge them by the color of their skin. I want people to get to know my kids and know that they are wonderful and that they can live in a world that is peaceful and welcoming to them. And again, this is a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. giving this very famous I Have a Dream speech. And all these little speckles are people. But again, I have a picture of the real life Martin Luther King Jr. And this is what he looked like. He was a leader. He was a human being. And there was highs and there was lows, but everything that he said, he did with love and he did with peace, and he led others to be peaceful as well. The next year, 1 year after this big I Have a Dream speech in 1964, Dr. King was awarded one of the greatest honors any person can win, the Nobel Peace Prize. The country was changing. New laws were passed. Blacks could go to the same schools as whites. They could go to the same stores, restaurants, and hotels. White only signs were against the law. Now, just because the signs were against the law didn't mean that people were happy about it. Some people were very angry that these whites only signs were against the law now. They still wanted their signs. Dr. King told his followers to protest peacefully, but there were some riots and some violence. Then, in April 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee. He planned to march so black and white garbage workers could get the same pay for the same work. So, after the whites only signs were gone, there were some people that wanted to fight. There were some riots. That means that people were more than just one group of people were fighting, that there was people were angry. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, please keep the peace, and went to Memphis, Tennessee to help garbage workers because the white people and the black people were doing the same job, but they were not getting the same pay. And they wanted to work on making things fair. But people were arrested. On April 4th in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had gone to help the garbage workers, Dr. King stood outside his motel room. Another man, James Earl Ray, was hiding nearby. He pointed a rifle at Dr. King. He fired the gun. An hour later, Dr. King was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world free of hate, prejudice, and violence. Carved on the stone which marks his grave are the words, "I'm free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last." The end. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this powerful story of an important leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I hope that today, when many of us are off of school and work, that you say a quiet thank you to someone who came before us and worked so hard to make our world and our country a better place for all people. If you enjoyed the story of a picture book of Martin Luther King Jr., please hit that thumbs up button at the bottom of the page. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me. If you're not a subscriber yet, please click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of the page, and don't forget to click the bell so that you're notified when there's new content. I hope to see you all again real soon. Bye-bye.